Hello, welcome to Off the Shelf Reviews.
I'm Jess.
And I'm Gary. And today we're going to review and discuss Moontrap, which came out in 1989, with a screenplay from Tex Ragsdale and directed by Robert Dyke.
Ah, what's the synopsis of the film, Gary?
Well, the story follows Colonel Jason Grant, played by Walter Koenig, and Ray Tanner, played by Bruce Campbell. Two astronauts who discover an alien craft on a routine mission. They bring back an artifact to Earth which warrants an investigation on the moon, which houses a lost civilization, and some extraterrestrial killer robots that want to harvest humans for spare parts. For 14,000 years, it waited for us.
Oh, you're right, Alice. You're real right. One of these days, bang, zoom to the moon with you. Ralph Crampton.
This is, without a doubt, as B-movie as B-movies get. And this was absolutely a passion project for the writer-director who were childhood friends. They kind of worked in the industry, shooting commercials, doing miniature effects for the Evil Dead 2, they sort of networked and built friendships within the independent sort of movie making sphere whilst making those commercials, and they spent, according to Bruce Campbell, a good year funding this movie. They shot a couple of test bits, like showing how they would do the effects on the moon, and they managed to raise just under $4 million to go ahead and shoot this thing. And I think they had like two big sound stages in order to be able to do all of the effects, because this is a very ambitious movie, especially if you want to do a B movie, a low budget movie, and have astronauts, space and moon settings. You kind of need you need some money behind that in order to make it look effective and real without being laughed out of the cinema.
Yeah, I mean, there's some sequences where you kind of chuckle a little because the space shuttles look a little bit, especially when they're being knocked around in space. It's just like, oh, the model moved to the left a little bit. And it's just like somebody's just throwing a toy around. And you got to remember also time, and this is 1989, this film came out, so you can't be too cruel on the kind of effects. Because, I mean, honestly, you compare it to some of the films from that era, again, as we were trying to be relevant to the era these films came out in. And it did alright. I mean, it's not, again, this is the nature of these films. It isn't a masterpiece, and it isn't wholly original, and I don't know if it was wholly... Again, there is, without getting too much into the kind of expanded detail, there is a sequel sort of spin-off.
Well, once this film was finished and it was released, they had a script, they had something ready to go for a second movie, but the financing wasn't there, and it was, in the like 2011, they were trying again, same writer director trying to get a sequel off the ground. None of the cast were returning, and then in 2017, after some crowdsourcing funding, they did manage to actually release straight to DVD a sequel called Ground Zero, or
Moontrap Target Earth.
There you go.
It's like
and I've seen it, and it would just avoid the sequel.
They've got a passion project. I mean, I think it's chasing your dreams, and they did it for 21 years.
Yes.
So I mean, got to give them credit. They really chase their kind of ideas.
Is that what I think it is?
I think it is.
What the hell have we got here, Jason?
It's very Princess of Mars, the very kind of retro science where you ended up transported to a kind of ancient civilization that we kind of missed somehow with our telescopes on Mars. And the same sort of principle works here, where you kind of got, we've just spotted this spaceship in space, just somehow was there all along, and then something's on the moon, and it's all a little bit fanciful. But that's okay, I guess. It's kind of like...
Well, it is, especially when you've got Bruce Campbell, Ash, and you've got Walter Koenig, Chekhov, and, he was excited to be offered a leading role in a sci-fi movie, He's not even been second, third, or even fourth fiddle in the Star Trek, series and movies. And so to give him a leading role. You know, he jumped at the opportunity, and it's great. You know, the chemistry between the two of them here really works. You know, the banter back and forth where he wakes him up by triggering an alarm in the cockpit.
Yeah,
you know, and
the writing isn't perfect, but it is acceptable, if that makes sense. And it's not to be cruel. I mean, it's pretty sharp. I mean, the conversations aren't awful. I mean, some of the dialogue falls flat now and then, but it's fairly well. The whole film flows pretty well.
It has again, it's a 90-minute movie. Yeah, it goes at a pretty quick pace, but that's because, they couldn't really afford some of the transitions or the effects that would have linked certain scenes. But then again, I will say the film also does have plenty of padding at points as well. But when it's just these two on screen, just back and forth, the dialogue, the banter, it really works. And I love, they start reminiscing about what they did before they became astronauts, and they start talking about their call signs.
Look, I'll even tell you mine first, okay? Einstein.
The penetrator.
Yeah, and that was cute. And then obviously there's also, it's one, they're joking about their age as well in the same kind of conversation. It's like, we're both getting on a bit, but you're older than I am. It's just like, this is kind of amusing banter, and then they run into a spaceship.
Well, yeah, we get a sense of who these characters are, and then
It is pretty sharpish because they give them maybe 5 minutes of characters who are kind of maybe they give them enough time to stretch their character legs, and then we get more expansion in the midpoints, and then further kind of expansion throughout the film, which again is consistent character development where you kind of start to see who they are and what motivates them.
Yeah. Until they, as you said, they find a giant spaceship, which is dormant, and I think they explained that it's the gravitational decay. It means it's going to crash soon.
Yeah.
So they've only got a small window of opportunity to go and explore it, and they kind of wrestle with each other as to who should be the one to be able to go out into space, go on a spacewalk to go and explore it. And Colonel Jason Grant takes it upon himself to be the one to go and explore it.
He pulls rank. I'm going out there to say hello to aliens.
Yes. And again, we get some, fun practical effects here, some miniature work where we see the shuttle, we see him kind of moving along on a string.
Yeah, and it's all a little, this is where the script's a little bit flimsy, because it's like, there's a hole in the hull, I'll go look inside. Just like, and it's quite nice, and there's hieroglyphics and stuff, and it's all passable, until you're like, then there's
he finds
a device
this egg thing
just sitting at the edge of this hole in the hull, and then and that's like, I'll bring this back, and then a corpse went by.
Yeah.
So,
and it was a human looking skeleton as well.
I know that was the further confusing weirdness to
exactly, because then a moment later we're back on Earth, we're back at NASA, and we're in this operating theater, and they've got the corpse there, and they've got this egg there, and they're like, we've deducted that this corpse is 14,000 years old, and it would appear there were human civilizations that made it to space long before us. So the mystery kind of develops, but they also explain that they can't open this egg-like thing, although he does deduce that they could destroy it by opening it, but they also think that it's hollow inside.
Yeah, which is all foreshadowing. The younger Dryas certainly did have human civilizations around about 14,000 years ago, but it's a bit weird that this film actually digs that deep, which I don't think it is digging that deep.
No.
There's been lots of extinction events with civilizations have risen and fallen in prehistory, but this film is weird because I don't think they ever made it to the moon or space or anywhere off the planet. And the device is so weird, and that's not ever made clear, and this is the other thing. Which ambiguity is fine in certain filmmaking senses, but there's no chain of kind of foreshadowing. There's no flashback scenes where you kind of get some psychic projection or data cube or something that explains a little bit or foreshadows a bit more cleanly. It's like Event Horizon, where you get the flash of hell essentially through the eyes of various cast members to give you some credence to the realism of that as a what's coming essentially as the film rolls on. In this film, you're just told to accept it. Which is
Well,
kind of,
as
that's
in-
the one big criticism, because it's like, and then that turns out that little pod might be in a robot
Well, as an
alien
audience,
thing.
we did get a glimpse of a robot on the moon when we saw the original
Oh yeah,
moon
we
landing.
forgot to mention there was original stock footage of the moon landing.
Yeah, and a robot pops up out of the dust and then goes back into the dust again. So we kind of get an idea that there's something.
Yeah, but
on
no,
the
I
moon.
mean, it's not extrapolating on anything, as the film doesn't really extrapolate on what these are. They just get a
But
name.
that's the
we get-
mystery. That's why they decide that they need to go
but
to the
even
moon.
the best horror films give me a monster and then extrapolate a little bit.
Well, you're not immediately. You've got to let it
They
build.
don't even build it. You don't get that immediately. You don't even get it later, which I'm trying not to. I mean, it's not like we're spoiling a film that came out nearly 20 years ago, over 20 years ago. But to keep it in kind of chronological order, there are no real big reveals in this. There's just angry little robots.
Yeah, I'm also happy with that.
Yeah, but you could watch Johnny Five for a slightly less angry little robot. I don't know.
Well, there is a bit of a political moment in the film here where, you get this suit guy who's just like, well, this looks all fake news to me. Fake corpse, fake
You're trying to get your
contraption.
budget increased.
You're trying to get your
aren't
budget
you? Sneaky
increased.
NASA.
And they're like, no, we need to figure out what this is. And they all go wandering off to go and get coffee, and Tanner's getting upset with a coffee machine, and he gives us, we don't take crap from robots, as he boots the vending machine to get his coffee.
Hey, we don't take no shit from a machine.
Meanwhile, this lone scientist goes wandering into that operating theater to see what's what, and we see this robot, this egg cocoon open up. We see this little animatronic robot peer out, and the glass breaks, and we see these sparks flying off from behind, and we hear these robotic sound effects. We're like, well, I guess, they didn't have the budget to show this robot doing what it was doing, and you can see it kind of connecting or trying to drag bits and pieces to it as it's rebuilding
uses
itself.
The corpse of a 2,000-year-old man.
And then we see this scientist wander in there, and she kind of gets grabbed. We see a bit of blood, drop
This
to the
isn't
ground.
the most gruesome film, to be clear.
Absolutely not. Well, I think it's a PG-rated
Yeah.
movie. And she kind of gets thrown into the wall and dies. And so, the alarm goes off. We see soldiers running through the facility. Everyone's like, oh no, what could it be?
Yeah, cheesy NASA outfits. I was chuckling because NASA has a dedicated SWAT team on site.
Of course they do. In case of, giant robots attack. Like this one.
Yes, as it builds a mega robot.
And it's an interesting design.
kinda got
They
the
did
corpse
the
built
best
into
thing.
the middle
Exactly,
of
it's
it.
got the human rib cage. It even has the human skull underneath its headpiece visor.
Yeah, where you can see the little eggs helmet.
Yes, yeah. And all the soldiers they train their guns on it, and you get the one guy's like, no. This is the first contact. Like, you don't want first contact to be, at gunpoint. So he goes up there and he tries to make peace with it until it blasts him in his arm. And one of, if not my favourite line delivery in the film, where he turns around to the soldiers and says, "Get this son of a bitch!"
Get the son of a bitch! Let him have it! Open fire!
It's all wonderfully, a little bit hammy, as we said. And I mean, that's the nature of this kind of wonderful, kind of low budget wackiness. And at this point, the Colonel's in the vents.
Yeah,
For no apparent reason.
Well, no, it's
I mean-
because all of the soldiers' guns are just ricocheting off it. They're doing no damage. And I was like, this thing was made out of spare parts that they found in this NASA room. I was like, that's not bulletproof, is it? Or maybe it is.
Again, it's the kind of, as I said, this film is what it is. And it has to have the main characters be heroic, so...
He's called Einstein, or his call sign was Einstein, so he has to outsmart the robot.
with a shotgun and an air vent.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, you see the sprinklers there, and you're like, oh, maybe he's going to hit the sprinkler and, douse the robot.
Nope, he just wants to get a better angle on it.
Yeah, well, yeah, point blank range with a shotgun to the headpiece, and down goes the robot.
I know. Oh, and it falls apart.
Oh, it explodes.
Like a pile of Lego bricks.
Yes.
It's quite amusing to watch. And I mean, that's, again, we're trying to be nice about the budget, but this is where you're like...
But this is then what gives the scientists, like, look, you know, this is real, this has actually happened. But they also figure out that the robot had connected to the spaceship and sent it crashing into the moon anyway. And it landed, I think, at Prometheus Point or Prometheus Crater. Yes. And they're like, right, we need to go back to the moon.
So they send two men with very. I mean, again,
you get the more filler scenes now where you follow Jason Grant back at home. You know, he's doing exercise, he's doing push-ups. You know, because he doesn't know whether he's going to be the one to get the call to go back there, and so they figure out that they want to kind of keep it a little bit hush hush, so that they will use the same two astronauts that first did discover it.
Yes.
And then we also follow then to Ray, who's deciding to spend his afternoon getting drunk at a strip club.
Now you said, I'm not sure this is a PG because there are.
No, it's a PG rated movie still. Oh. Well, according to IMDb, it's still listed as a PG movie, even though it has a couple of instances of boobies.
Yeah, because obviously, you know, he's got drunk in a strip bar and is spilling all this top secret information. So his commander's got to go rescue America from the damnation of evil robots around space.
We also get introduced to our third sort of co-pilot in this as well. It's Tom Case, who plays Beck, who will be the guy who stays in the orbiter whilst the two of them actually descend down to the moon.
Yes.
And you get, again, you know, it's another one of those transitions where it's like, we're going to the moon. And you get, you know, you get Walter Koenig's face as we see the rocket take off, stock footage of the shuttle taking off. You're like, okay.
Yeah, the stock footage is amusing. I keep pulling out stock.
And then instantly, boom, they're already back on the moon and they've got their moon buggy.
I mean, you know, they've made those 90 minutes really kind of count. They were just like... It's Game of Thrones later seasons all over. We're just teleporting all over the place. There's no transitions. There
is. They're just very quick.
Wow, we're here already. That's
but then now we get the padding where it's endless moon buggy shots, and you know, I like props to the production team, the special effects team, for doing these miniatures. You know, they used like powdered cement to give the effect of moon dust, which kind of looks fairly effective, but all of the actors moving around on the moon don't look like they're walking around on the moon.
No, they're not like fighting.
You know, there's no strings to give them, you know, that you know, the lack of gravity. But then, like, the moon buggy shots are just like, I love miniatures, I really do. But, you know, now we've seen this film blown up in HD, it really looks quite wonky. Like, I could not help but laugh at these effects, but I enjoyed them all the same.
Yeah, I mean, this isn't an offensively bad effects film. I mean, its age, I think, is more the issue than the effects.
Yes.
Because I think the effects, for their time, were clearly good. I mean... The director went on to make a handful of other films, be involved in the effects on other films, and some of them were fairly large-scale movie pieces. So I mean, not many. They are both of quite a small filmography. So I assume they have, as they work in broader cinema on smaller projects. But it is. I honestly think it is a fairly. As much as we dig at the bit on the moon, the budgeted economy of it all works really rather well.
Yeah.
I mean, and I mean, now you do get a lot of like robots popping out of all the concrete dust, as we said, and these as they make their way to this kind of tomb on the moon. Like, oh my god, we found a tomb on the moon.
This lost civilization, how could we miss this? And he's like, no wonder we couldn't see this with our telescopes, because it's built into like a giant crater or a mountain on the moon. And, you know, I like the design of it. I like the, you know, the hieroglyphics that are in there. You know, the shot of the moon buggy pulling up and them walking in. I don't know whether it was, you know, composite shots, green shots, matte paintings. I'm not quite sure. But it was very effective. Like the shot when two of them walk into the entrance and you see how vast it is, and the two of them, they just start joking about maybe this was a banquet hall, maybe they held weddings or receptions here, or human sacrifices.
Yeah, weddings,
Baptisms,
communions,
bar mitzvahs,
oh golly, revivals,
harmonic convergences.
human sacrifices.
It is. Again, it's weird because this is where the story's just like, how do we?
They don't do too much exploring here. They end up walking into this room that's covered with dust, and they find more human skeletons.
But they also find it's got atmosphere.
Not immediately.
No, well,
they clear the dust of this central contraption, and they find a woman that's still perhaps alive in there. So they open it up, and she climbs out. We realize she's not wearing any spacesuit of any kind. She grabs one of their space Uzi guns and aims it at them and falls over. And that is when Jason takes his helmet off, and he's like, "No, don't shoot. I'm a human." And I'm like, "Oh, okay. Well, I guess she's not an alien, and there's atmosphere in here, even though the door was like wide open."
I know, it was super weird. The whole sequence wasn't. Again, this is where they're kind of just getting plot beats done as fast as possible. It's like, don't worry, we could explain that, but we haven't got the time. It's on the clock, boys. We're on the clock.
It's like, me, Ray. Me, Jason. You, Mira. Excellent. Right, it's time to go. And, she has a nice little moment.
And now you make it's even more on the clock. Right, I really haven't got any more time for this. We've done far too much character development.
Well, she can't speak. She doesn't know English, although, she's getting there.
Very
but she has a
quickly,
really nice moment where she goes up to the other skeleton, and she's like, "Oh, the bracelet, obviously it was a dead lover of some kind." But then, the two of them like, "How are we going to get her out of here?" She opens a little compartment. She's got her own spacesuit.
Like little red spacesuit, yeah.
Which we did see the robot using when it was communicating with its ship earlier. And it had, it did like a DNA compositing of the dead astronaut. And we got to see him, replicated his face in his suit. And it was the same one. So, okay, so she's definitely from the same species, and I guess they were all wiped out, probably by these robots.
Yeah, they're essentially ancient humans who...
She actually gives them a name. It's like Kalians or Killians or something.
Some ancient civilization.
Yeah. And now we get lots more moon buggy shots as we have the three of them making their way back to the moon lander. Which Beck in the orbiter says, "Hey guys, your orbiter, it's I'm getting some weird signals." And we cut back to one of the robots. Well, it looks like it's lifting it up out of the ground and hijacking it for some reason. And so when they finally get back there in their moon buggy, they're like, "Oh, it's gone." Well, at least it left tracks for us. I guess we follow the tracks. Cue endless shots of the moon buggy going across the moon.
Yeah, a bit of Benny Hill going on here would have probably made more sense.
There's a great moment where he's just like, where the moon buggy comes to a stop. And he's like, "Okay, Einstein, think our way out of this one. What do we do next?" It's like, "I guess we walk." "Oh, okay."
Okay, Einstein. What next? We walk.
Yeah.
Cue endless walking on the moon.
Yeah, this is the bit that drags. I know they're showing off the kind of set building chops, as it were, but it is a little bit, unfortunately, weird filler. I mean, they could have done more, as we said, with filling in other places, and I mean, it is important. And I mean, having a tension race across the moon, which would have been a bit sharper cut, would have built the tension, as it were. I mean, because it does take the edge off when you're kind of wandering aimlessly through a desert. I don't know. It works for a Western, but it doesn't work so well for a kind of aliens threatening Earth scenario.
So they do eventually make it back, or they make it to where the moon lander had been taken, and that's when they get attacked by more robots. I mean, they did get attacked in the other place, and they blew it away with their space Uzis. But when they get jumped here, it's almost like a surprise attack. Where Ray kind of gets stabbed by one of these robots. They do manage to kill the robot, and then we do get the extended Bruce Campbell death sequence.
I'm not going anywhere. Screw you. You're gonna make it.
Just remember one thing.
What's that?
We don't
take no shit from a machine. Right! Wait for it! No shit!
It is very sad, but it's also very confusing because if you're stabbed in a spacesuit, you're normally dead pretty quickly.
Yeah, maybe it just crushed him inside. I don't know.
Maybe.
It's not very clear what actually happened
No,
to him.
it isn't,
But he's got blood all over his face, so you know he's dying.
Yes, and again, as we said, their understanding of how a vacuum of space is ropey at best. So I guess they were just wanting to do what they do, and then why get wrapped up in, details.
And so, he's just like, okay, well, maybe now we'll just put up this tent and just have a quick timeout, a quick breather to collect our thoughts. And he pulls out this thing from the moon buggy, sets it down, and it makes like this space igloo thing. And he walks through these flaps and then takes his helmet off. And I was like, what? How does that work? There was no kind of sense of a doorway or a way to cut off the vacuum. And then, out of nowhere, cue romance. I was like, she's taking her clothes off, they're having a kissing moment. I was like, wait a minute. According to her, she went to sleep yesterday and woke up. So for her, all of the passage
and maybe
of
a lover's
time,
just died.
Her lover's just died. So for her, it's only been a day.
She's quickly getting over it. I mean,
very quickly. I was
it's a
like,
rebound relationship.
What
maybe
is happening?
I mean, that's the whole thing. The rest of this film does fall into that, where you're like, it's just a bit too convenient.
Yes.
Everything becomes a bit contrived. And that's where I will, I don't know I suppose we'll have to argue this is that set your expectations as low as possible with this film. You'll have more fun with it because it isn't
Well, I'm like,
highbrow.
if this is a horror movie, the two of you have just doomed yourselves and you killed off Bruce.
Well, I already was confused when the Colonel, were down on back on Earth, and he had his son. His son showed up like, oh no, he's got a family. Oh, Bruce.
But he's clearly divorced, or he's separated from his wife because of his commitment to work.
Yes, or they couldn't afford to hire an actress.
Maybe.
Yeah. It's just the nature of it, and I was like, oh wait, so he's gonna die because he's got family members, and that's generally like, no, this film does at least not fall into certain.
It was more of like
he
is the lead actor, he's the lead of the film, so he gets the girl essentially, and he gets her at the just past the halfway point of the film. So cue more boobies. And it's not like an extended sex sequence.
No.
They kind of go out of frame, and then in the next shot they're like suits back up. That was fun. They don't even talk to each other. It's just really awkward.
I know. I mean, if you were gonna want to have another out of spacesuit sequence, you should have had another Martian ancient human kind of facility she takes him to. But that would have required far too much communication.
Yeah.
Or writing, I suppose, because that is the issue. I mean, it just feels like this is an underwritten film. I mean, the dialogue isn't awful, and it flows competently, but you do end up with a kind of stuttering. Like, this moment's just out of the blue, doesn't really function, doesn't really have somewhere for people to have interactions. In Underwater, as an example, you have the move from different habitats, and it allows you to have those human interaction moments out of the suits, because again they're playing with a spacesuit scenario as well, and it kind of it limits you if somebody's only able to speak through like a very limited kind of environmental suit of some sort. I know some movies do that, and some movies will have an astronaut themed, very authentic, in the spacesuit for 80% of the film, but in horror, you kind of do want to see more reaction and gory death, obviously. In this one, obviously, it's more of a soft gore. There isn't really any real bloody horror. But, I mean, that is the issue I think we're having in this film, where they're not clearly thinking how to have those out-of-suit moments in the plot flow. And, like, a pop-up tent, which apparently is able to support, two human beings for an extended period and supply oxygen and have a protection to the cold, hard vacuum of space.
Especially considering how easily it gets torn open when robotic Bruce Campbell turns up with that that awesome grin on his face as he's peering through the window, and then he starts tearing it to pieces.
I know. The way they're assimilating the corpses is, again, a theme which we've seen in many other films, but it doesn't work because I don't think they go quite gory enough.
Well, no, I mean, it literally, I mean, we can't see any other human parts, just the head that's been used here. But I don't know, it was effective enough, but they make short work of him, you know, they blast him with the space Uzis and down he goes. I was like, well, it kind of didn't work with the guns you were using on Earth, but I guess these ones are better weapons?
Yeah, of course, they would have sent them with the best, most high-tech blasty weapons in America.
I just remembered there was another part in the film that confused me as well, just jumping back a little bit, when they're in the moon buggy. And they get to they're going up an incline. You see the wheels turning in the dust, and they're like, "Oh, it's too steep an incline for the moon buggy. We'll have to walk." And then in the very next shot, and I was just like, "What?"
Yeah, that was again.
Yeah, there's just a few moments that just like, what were you thinking?
There must be stuff on the cutting floor.
Maybe,
because again,
yeah.
this is where you can be nice to them because you kind of got to go. Okay, well, assume your budget wasn't all there. You might have had more script than you wanted. Again, that's why they fought for a sequel, but maybe they wanted to do a little bit more. And maybe there is an expanded lore to their universe that... Well, there must clearly be. It's a passion project for these two guys. But at the same time, you do sit back and go, I don't know if you thought this through entirely, boys.
No.
And again, maybe they're limited by the time they were writing this in sci-fi. But then, I don't know, there's better sci-fi, like I said, Princess of Mars and stuff, where you go back and kind of look at all these fantasyful space movies, or TV shows or books. Obviously, it's a broader spectrum, but and they do it better, I suppose, and. That is my biggest criticism, I think. They just had a great value for money here is amazing. But it does feel like the vision behind it isn't terrible, but it's incomplete.
Yeah.
And that would be half the time when you're like, what's going on? And it's not, sometimes it's laughable and sometimes you're just a bit confused. Like you said, it's like, wait, what did they get out? I mean, it's just like, it's not quite laugh out loud moment, but you're just like, but the buggy, you're always in the buggy because it's the moon. Do you understand gravity? I mean, you're probably both of you are just bouncing your seats to lift the moon a little bit.
Right, and then just fire thrusters to bring you back down again.
But the moon isn't. Again, I know they didn't budget or couldn't budget to have the physics of the moon.
Yeah,
but
have a crane to actually move it, and
crane with the buggy on a bungee cord.
Speaking of humorous effects, the two of them end up getting ambushed by multiple robots at this point, and we see them get picked up out of the air and being cradled, and we can just see one of the astronauts' legs is just kicking just ever so lightly as they're being held, and I was like, wow, are these robots massive or what? Or are these like, I don't know, the perspective of heights, it's fine. And then in the next shot, they're tied up and held hostage in this giant room where we can see multiple other egg-like cocoons, which obviously house more of these robots that can build extra parts.
They've been taken out of their spacesuits.
Yes.
Which, again, politely not destroying the spacesuits because they're going to be back in them in a little bit. And that's why I just keep chuckling at this.
Where in comes this, this doctor robot that's got this surgical spinning blade, and he starts hacking off the clothing of Mira, and you're like, okay, is this going somewhere? And now, Einstein, he manages to... Well, he doesn't really think his way out of this. He just manages to struggle free from his restraints, and he goes over and grabs a severed arm and beats the robot to death.
It is
okay.
Again. It's just this is such a strange movie at this moment because it is just daft, and that's the problem. It's just a little bit silly that when you start putting it in context, they're like being attacked by robots on the moon, but they're fighting it with the severed arm. It's just like, if it had an R rating and was just gore and mayhem and anarchy, it'd be all right. But again, and also like I said, if they thought through how to better make sense of all this, because the idea isn't terrible. Let's say the monsters weren't great, and that's the little eggs that keep opening, these little robots that pop out. It doesn't feel threatening. It just feels like, well, you killed one with a shotgun that had built a robot that was like 10 foot tall, and now you're on the moon and you've beaten one with a severed arm. These are these aren't quite xenomorphs, mate. I mean, a single xenomorph killed an entire crew of a ship.
Yeah, but
one of these is having trouble with a man with a severed arm.
Yeah, but if you get an army of these robots, then we could be in trouble. And so,
what you give?
We
Then
need
I
to
just need
stop
an
these
army
robots.
of men with severed arms as they beat the army to death. And I mean, it's just, yeah.
Seems like they never learn.
So we're going to have to find a way to stop these robots. And so they suit up and they try to find their way to escape the ship. But they also try to find their way back to the Lunar lander, which was the final component that these robots needed in order to be able to take this ship to Earth so that they could deploy their army of robots. And we get some awkward moments where we see them climbing up, and and he's like, "Oh, we're at 0 G's here. There's no gravity." And we get the miniatures again of these two puppets hanging on ropes, and then for some reason they're able to propel themselves across where they need to get to. Okay.
All right, hang on.
They make their way to the Lunar lander, and he activates the self-destruct system.
Which obviously every Moon lander comes with.
We also then cut back to NASA, who have then launched another shuttle because they lost contact with the other mission, and so the self-destruct system's going down. He ends up getting attacked by another robot. He shoots his gun, but they end up getting propelled through space, and he's like, Einstein moment, and he keeps firing the gun until they both end up blasting themselves into space just in time for the other shuttle to spot them and pick them up.
It's all very convenient in the hard, complex
And
vacuum of space.
Then there's an awesome explosion that leaves nothing behind.
Goddamn government contractors.
Oh, no
Yes.
debris whatsoever.
And then you cut to Earth, and he's with his beautiful 14,000-year-old girlfriend.
Yes.
Wife.
Like, wow.
Mother of his son. There we go. Maybe his wife died in childbirth. He was a single father, and now he's found his wife, who's...
Yeah.
NASA's just like, yeah, whatever, she's 14,000 years old, we just need to know what the hell's going on. She has technology far beyond our imagination.
Yeah, well, at least her English is coming along now. She can speak more fluently.
She's probably a genius. Who knows? I mean, yeah.
But then, horror trope ending, we cut to a junkyard where one of those pods opens up. We see the little miniature robot pop up, and it pans back to reveal that it's in a massive junkyard, which means it can assemble all kinds of manner of things from what's lying around. Cue credits. And then towards the end of the credits, we hear Jason Grant talking to NASA, like, "Are we sure none of the debris managed to make it to Earth?" Like, no, it's all fine. All would have burnt up on re-entry. Cue sequel. Or not. No.
There was a spin-off sort of reboot, whatever that thing was.
It has nothing to do with the original film whatsoever.
No, I mean, they tried to make a sequel, but they could never get the funding. And I mean, the film isn't awful, but it's, as I said, it's just clunky. The whole thing's clunky. They did really well with the budget, I think. That's one thing you have to be fair with. Budgetary-wise, this feels like a far higher budget film, and without but the script and the narrative are just all over the place. The physics, even for the time, there were better films that understood the death that is space. The grim, hard void that devours all life. It is just like you have these beautifully mummified corpses in, and you're like, oh, that's cool. And then when they took the helmets off, at one point when you first encounter Mary, you're like, what is going on? This is just... Oh, and that's where it took the wind out of my sails, really, because I was like, oh, this isn't bad, even though the robot in the NASA base was a bit daft, and it all felt a little bit contrived in the NASA base, especially the shotgun in the vents. It's just like, oh, he's fighting in the vents. It's like, okay, that feels like an entire different encounter where all the security team are dead and he's fighting alone, and it's very Alien, where you're kind of fighting a kind of guerrilla war against this thing, trying to kill it. But it wasn't. It was just to kind of... They did that sequence wholeheartedly in the wrong way. And I mean, the whole encounter, bar the pun of the man trying to make first contact.
Get the son of a bitch! Let him have it! Open fire!
Everything else just felt a little daft. Not in a... Again, this is the problem. It makes me a little sad because it's not terrible. It's just all a little daft when it's not working. And that keeps cropping up. But the polish otherwise is there. And I mean, they shot this on film in quite well-built sets and sound stages.
Well, just, do you have any favourite scenes from the film?
That's really difficult, actually, because I know you're gonna say, "Oh, but the robot looked kind of cool in that base." It was all right. Everything was all right, and that's the issue. I think the spaceship, the hieroglyphs, and the moon tomb with hieroglyphs, which all looked a bit similar, and you're like, but the spaceship and the moon base weren't the same. And she had a spacesuit. I assume that was a different civilization. Either way, I mean, the little robots were not great. I just didn't think they were a very good enemy. That was the biggest issue. And that has to be said, as an enemy goes. Couldn't they conceive a slightly cooler robot? Or something a little bit more ominous? No. And I mean, yeah, you're going to be like, well, they didn't have the animatronics for it. And I'm like, well, they kind of... That's the problem. If you're going to have a monster movie, you need the monster to make me scared. Instead, it was like Johnny Five's little brother, who wasn't very scary but wanted me dead. And then was killable with like a 7-arm or a shotgun blast. And I'm like... But okay, scenes, sorry, as I kind of critique it again, I was just like... I think, as I said, I think the space and the moon animatronics in general were very good. And I liked even if they did just teleport the vehicle there, apparently, because they had to walk and it appeared, where they drove up and it appeared, this tomb on the moon. I'm like, oh, this is going to be good. As I said, Princess of Mars, the kind of concept where you're like, oh, this is going to be kind of a tension-riddled kind of, suddenly we're in a, but maybe they could have mixed some magic-ish stuff into it to explain why they can just suddenly be like, oh, we can just take our helmets off. Unexplained. It's like, I'm pretty sure if you speak to any NASA astronaut, they're going to be like, the moment I'm trying to take my helmet off, NASA should be tasering me, getting me back on my shuttle, because I'm having a mental breakdown on the moon.
I just guess they were in a pressurized room.
Maybe, but again, they don't...
You risk it. I mean, he didn't scan the room or anything.
Yeah. They didn't, go through a kind of vacuum door, no sealed door closed and opened, and there was no hiss of atmosphere.
Yeah.
Nope, it's just...
Just took a gamble.
Yeah, it was just all a little bit...
Well, I had quite a few, memorable moments in the film.
Actually. Hand coming out of the coffin was kind of...
Yeah.
I was a trepidation. You weren't sure if it was going to be an actual bad guy who...
android or cyborg, yeah.
Yeah, it wasn't, though.
I thought, the film is fairly memorable, but there aren't many scenes that stand out. But I thought that they were, they used what they had very well, and even though the robots didn't look menacing and scary, the way they lit them with the backlight, creating the shadows, especially in that corridor, and on the scale of the thing, they made it at least intimidating in its size, even though its weapons kind of look like the hook claws that come out of those machines that would drop the toys. It just not very effective at all. But I thought, they made it work, within the film, with what they had. And so, yeah, not scary, but at least they shot it well and they lit it well with the smoke machines.
It was a competently made film, and that's the thing. It's I have a go at films for not having vision, but I felt like this does have a vision. I just don't feel it works. And that's the issue. I think the monsters aren't scary enough. Maybe it's the rating, maybe it's the budget. I'm not sure. And again, you kind of dig at little, and it's difficult when you're talking about best scene. I mean, it is really difficult because there really aren't any scenes that jump out at you, but the film as a whole isn't so terrible that it gets a bit slow and draggy in certain areas. And but nothing, you don't look at it and go, that looks like it's a dodgy cardboard set and it's about to be blown over in the wind. I mean, it's difficult. This film is difficult to kind of critique in that regard.
Well, Jess, do you recommend Moontrap?
It's difficult. I probably will say sure, because it's inoffensive B-movie gumph. And it is competently put together, even if I don't think it's adding anything particularly grand, intelligent, highbrow, or interesting to the kind of genre. It's not particularly gruesome. It's just an interesting film with two interesting actors that you may know and love. And I mean, that's sure, if you're viewing history as down to who's in the film, then sure, chase Bruce Campbell across the universe. And Chekhov. But it's a weird film. It's a very strange passion project of two men, and I think that's probably the truth of the film. If you want to see a passion project of two guys who clearly have been friends since childhood, trying to bring together something they must have conceived together, and they've clearly got a great deal of love for that. They've still, up to 2017, still trying to make
Moontrap movies.
Moontrap movies in their kind of little play sandbox of kind of ideas, then enjoy it. And I think that's genuinely where I'd advise it. I mean, it's an interesting, strange little film. Worth a watch if you've got some spare time.
Yes, I'll also be recommending Moontrap. It absolutely gets a recommendation to watch from me, especially if you really enjoy low-budget sci-fi horror that's ambitious, creative, entertaining, and fun. Of course, the effects look naff and incredibly dated now, but it's also incredibly charming. And a quick look behind the scenes, you can see how hard the effects team worked to bring this story to life. Any movie with the legendary Bruce Campbell is automatically elevated, and he is so fun to watch here alongside Walter Koenig. The film was well shot by Peter Klein, capturing some realism with some excellent sets within a range of miniatures, composite shots and effects, and the music by Joseph Loduca of the Evil Dead trilogy fame certainly added to the dread in the atmosphere, while certainly evoking like a 1950s feel with some industrial synthesizer music score. Altogether, it merged fairly well with a decent story that, yes, it's cheesy, it's campy at times, and it plods along, but I never found the film boring. It's safe to say this film wasn't going to win any awards, but its production team went to great effort to get it made, and now in high definition, it's a wonder to watch and cherish, what could have disappeared into obscurity. This has always been a favourite among genre fans, and it may not be a cult classic, but if you overlooked this, and it sounds like a good way to spend a lazy Saturday afternoon, give this one a watch. Thanks for watching Off the Shelf Reviews.
Bye-bye now.